3, 2, 1, punch it.
Could you jump to light speed in that tin can? Go back in time in a DeLorean? Will it crash or take to the sky? Tell me, smart guy, does it fly?
Welcome to Does It Fly, the podcast that puts your favorite sci-fi properties, inventions, and conceits to the test. I'm your mad scientist, Hakeem Oluseyi.
And I'm your pop culture expert, Tamara Krinsky. Time to dive into today's topic and see, does it fly?
Tamara, is this episode about you?
Hakeem. Sorry, you've been planning that line for a while, haven't you?
No, I just popped into my head. I'm sitting here, I'm looking at your gorgeous red hair. I happen to know you're petite.
I am.
You put those two together, you don't quite get the title of this episode, but you get...
It's pretty close.
You're in the neighborhood.
It's pretty close to Red Dwarf, which is our show for today.
Yes. So Red Dwarf is another British sci-fi series. And, you know, I grew up watching British series. I used to watch, and I still do, Doctor Who. I hear he has a name, but to me, he's the curly-haired guy. Remember that doctor in the 70s? That guy.
Uh-huh.
And You Have Been Served. Is that what it's called in a department store?
I don't see. I didn't grow up watching British TV.
Oh, you didn't grow up watching British?
No.
It was on PBS.
I didn't grow up watching any of that. So for me,
Oh.
this series, which started in like 1989-ish on BBC or BBC Two, was not something that I grew up with. And I really didn't watch a lot of British stuff at all. So
in the 2000s, I started going on these foreign movie kicks, right? Really got hard into Bollywood, really started getting into Korean movies a lot. Been getting into like, you know, there's this like one Norwegian Thor series I streamed a couple of seasons of. Anyway, Red Dwarf.
Right. Well, no, I just want to say, so for me, my entree into foreign films was actually when I started programming film festivals. So, right, because
what does that mean, programming?
Programming film festivals means actually like screening and choosing what you're going to show at a film festival. So I spent a lot of my early time in Hollywood, either in theaters or in small dark rooms, watching stuff. You know, you would get stuff on, I mean, now it comes through streaming links, but you would get stuff on DVD and you would pop it in and you would watch. And you've got a whole...
So it comes from around the world?
It depends on the film festival. So one of the film festivals I worked for extensively was a film festival that HBO did in Aspen, Colorado, and it was a comedy festival. And it started as this live comedy festival where you had amazing comedians, stand-up, sketch, improv, all of it. And then they started a film component of it. And the cool thing about that is that, you know, because I've also programmed for Sundance and AFI, the American Film Institute, and a whole bunch of others. But there was definitely a trend with those festivals where what I'll call sort of like very gritty, you know, indie films were what got chosen and put on screen.
Right.
As they should be, because there's a lot of amazing movies. But comedies kind of got the short shrift. Like, they didn't get taken as seriously.
This episode of Does It Fly is presented by Screen UK. Screen UK is a free discovery platform celebrating the very best of UK-produced film, television, animation, and gaming, and sharing it with audiences around the world. Screen UK is the go-to place to discover your next favorite movie, show, or game, and features tons of exclusive behind-the-scenes interviews and all the info you need to find out how and where to watch or play your newest obsessions wherever you are in the world. Make screenuk.org your next stop. So, Red Dwarf, astro nerdy name, because Red Dwarf is not just a type of star. It's the most common type of star in our galaxy.
All right. So for those who may not be familiar, what exactly is a red dwarf?
Oh, yeah. So one, it's a series that we're going to describe in a minute. In our show, we evaluate the sci-fi series, movies, conceits, based technologies based on three things. The first is the science. So I evaluate, does the science fly? Can it work today? Will it ever work? Then I hand it over to Tamara, like I'm doing right
And
now.
I will take a look at it from the story point of view. So, in all good sci-fi and all good fantasy, we set up a what if, and does the show fly with that what if? Do they play by the rules of their own world? Is it a place that we like to play in because of the characters or the setting? And then once we've looked at it from a story point of view, we get to our third question, which is, does it fly for the feels?
For the vibes, baby. Red Dwarf, the series, is a comedy sci-fi series from Britain. It takes place on a ship called the Red Dwarf.
Yep, correct. Yeah.
Yep.
Mhm.
And what happens is it starts off with this character who you could tell he's not the straight guy in the show, who breaks the rules and is sentenced to 18 months in a stasis where he's behind a sort of time wall where time stops. And so he's going to be in there 18 months, lose 18 months of pay, but then something goes wrong.
Wait, hold on. I
And
feel
he
like
wake
I feel like I
yeah.
have to mention the reason that he got in trouble. And the reason that he gets in trouble from his superior is because he smuggles a cat on board, which is a big no-no because, as the superior says, they can get caught in things. They could have diseases, like we need to quarantine it. He totally doesn't want to do that. So he's given this choice of like, nix the cat or go into stasis for 18 months. And he chooses to go into stasis. So that's the
Yes,
setup.
yes. And by the way, the cat is pregnant.
Yes, the cat is pregnant.
So, yeah. So anyway, he comes out. It turns out that he hasn't been in there for 18 months. Everybody's dead. His last human. And it's like, what, how many million years later?
3 million years. He's
3
been in there. He's been in
million
stasis for
years
3 million
later.
years, and he is the last human.
Where is everybody gone?
They're dead, Dave.
Who is?
Everybody, Dave.
What, Captain Hollister?
Everybody's dead, Dave.
Yes. All right. So that's the show. The red dwarf itself is the most common type of star and the smallest type of star in our galaxy. There are tens of billions of them. For every sun-like star, there's like 3 at least of these. So what I've seen was like 20 billion sun-like stars in the galaxy and 60 billion red dwarfs. But that red dwarf number sounds low to me.
Okay.
So, yeah. But let me tell you why red dwarfs are so super cool.
Yeah.
The main way we discover planets around other stars quickly is by what is known as the transit method. So what happens is the plane of that solar system is just right so that when the planets orbit their star, we look at the planet pass in front of the star, which causes the star to dim a bit. And what it matters is what percentage of the sun's surface does the planet cover. So if the planet covers 10% of the surface, it's going to block 10% of the light. So you'd see a dip. So that's going to select for particular types of stars are easier to find planets around. The smaller the star,
The harder to find a planet, right?
the easier. Because the planet, suppose the size of the planet doesn't change, but the size of the star gets smaller.
Oh, well, then it covers more of the percentage, right? Am I doing my math right?
So you get a big, there you go. You did your math right. So for that reason. And so one of the most famous planetary systems is known as the TRAPPIST system. And it has 7 planets, and several of them are in the habitable zone of that star, which means that the conditions could be right for liquid water on the surface. But here's the thing about those little red stars. You know how we have flares and coronal mass ejections from our sun? Well, they have super flares and super coronal mass ejections.
That does not sound safe. That does not sound safe
not
for life
safe.
or for cell phone
Not
reception.
safe. And the other thing is, because they're so much smaller, their habitable zone is much closer to the star. So close, in fact, that the star and the planet get tidally locked. So an equivalent situation is the moon orbiting the Earth. The moon always keeps the same side facing the Earth. So these planets always keep the same side facing their explosive star. Yeah. So it's not, yeah, you're in the habitable zone, but
Doesn't sound so habitable to me.
might not be that habitable after all, right?
No.
So anyway, I think red dwarfs are super cool. So the name of the series being Red Dwarf, as a shout out to one of the most fascinating types of stars in our
So
galaxy.
you're already inclined to like this show.
Well, don't jump to any conclusions.
All right, so wait. So let's talk about the science that I want to hear you
Yeah.
talk about, that we're going to talk about, is can a human body be put into stasis for 3 million years?
That's the question, isn't it?
Well, and
that's your-
also then like be reanimated after all, not just survive, but like be reanimated and
Right.
seem to be fully capable of all of its functions.
Yeah, right. That 3 million years. That's
Yeah.
So there's two aspects to this. So one aspect is actually being in stasis. And the other aspect is their particular way of achieving this is you go behind a time wall, right? You go behind, just like lead can block radiation.
Uh-huh.
This particular stasis chamber can block time. So what the person who puts him in the stasis chamber says is like, you're still mass, but you're no longer an event in space-time.
Although you exist, you no longer exist in time, and for you, time itself does not exist. You see, although you're still a mass, you are no longer an event in space-time. You are a non-event mass with a quantum probability of 0.
Okay, I am not a scientist, but that sounds like bullshit to me.
Complete bullshit. Because mass is, what we realize, which, it's interesting because a lot of things we're like, yeah, we finally convinced ourselves this is true. Einstein, 100 years ago said it. And we're like, yeah, that works, Einstein.
Right.
But one of them is basically the idea that mass is an illusion, right? We think of substance and stuff. There's this notion of emergent properties. So things that don't have a particular property can come together and a new property can emerge. So for example, take a simple geometric object like a line. A line does not have an area, but I can combine 4 lines to make a rectangle or 3 lines to make a triangle, and they do have areas, right? If I take 1 or 2 water molecules, you can't say that they're wet. But if I have a large collection, wetness emerges, right? So what was I talking about?
Well, you were talking about emergent properties, and we were talking about this idea of
Why?
the description in the show that behind this, well, you're in stasis.
Oh, right. Why is
time, and
bogus?
You're
why is
you're
bogus?
mass, or
Yeah.
you're not mass, or
Right. So mass, all you need for mass is confined energy. So Albert Einstein, when he figured out E equals mc squared, he said, really, there isn't this thing called mass. It's just all energy. So the existence of mass means the existence of energy. And here's where I'm going to go out on a limb, and my colleague is going to go, huh? What the hell does he mean? To me, the statement that energy exists is an equivalent statement to saying time exists, right? Because energy is that which causes changes, is that which makes stuff happen. And in order for that to exist, you need a before and after state. You require time. And if you look at the laws of physics and quantum physics, you can see that there's this deep, intimate relationship between time and energy. So if mass exists, energy exists, time exists, you cannot go into stasis behind a time wall. Yeah. Now, the other side of that coin from relativity is the fact that everything at all times is moving through space-time at the speed of light. Okay? So as a consequence of that, what they set up in the show in principle can occur, but not the way they say.
Okay,
all right?
What's wrong with how they say, and how could it occur?
So here's how it could occur. Since everything is moving through space-time at the speed of light, it's like the Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Instead, it's your speed through space squared plus your speed through time squared is equal to the speed of light squared. Here's what this means. You have one thing plus a second thing always equals the same number. So if I make one big, the other one has to get smaller so that their sum always equals the same number.
Okay, that makes
right?
sense.
That makes sense. And the second thing is all time is relative. So right now, you and I are at rest relative to each other, relatively speaking. We're both sitting here on our computers, which means that together we're moving through space at 0 and we're moving through time at the speed of light. But if you were to take off in the Red Dwarf going 90% the speed of light relative to me, Everything on board is still in the same time zone as you are. But now you're putting so much motion through space that your motion through time has been reduced relative to me. Not relative to things in the spaceship with
So
you, but to me.
would you see me in slow motion or fast motion then?
Slow
Oh, right?
motion. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Allegedly.
Allegedly.
It's confusing. It really is confusing. Everybody says they understand it, but I'm still like, I'm not, this is the twin paradox. But the point is that difference in energy states equals difference in rates of time travel. Okay. So all you have to do to have a difference in rate of time travel is to have a difference in energy state. So one energy state is, if you're in a deep gravitational well. So when you're on the surface of the earth, time moves more slowly than when you're farther away, right? Because you're in a different space-time curvature environment. Same. So what they do is create this false thing called a time wall that can't exist. But, all right.
So wait, are you saying though that if they could change the effect of gravity within
Yeah.
that time vault, that stasis chamber,
Yeah.
then that
Yeah.
potentially could happen?
That potentially could happen.
Okay.
That's what happens in the movie Interstellar, right? They're on a planet near a black hole. Space-time is so curved there that the rate of time travel is really slow compared to what's going on outside. So they're basically not moving through time. And so you can meet your kid and they're like 30 years older than you later, right? Because you're in different, and that's reality. That is a reality of space-time. Okay.
It's also the reality
So
of having a teenager. They like to think that they're a whole bunch of years older than you are.
remember those days when we were like, yes, I'm older than I am.
Mhm. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I desire to be older than I am.
Oh my god, all my child wants to do right now is to teach me how to use various electronic pieces of equipment because I clearly
It's funny
know
you say
nothing.
that.
I know nothing at all.
That's how I feel about my phone, especially when it comes to like photography and
Uh-huh.
videography. A 12-year-old is like a master. you know,
Well, they're digital natives. This is the only
they're
world they've
native.
ever known.
Yeah, and it's their real friends. Like I say, I used to often say that I bonded with books instead of humans. I feel like now, all this generation bonds with their phone instead of other
So
humans.
wait, so when you were growing up, because I did the same thing, especially I
Yeah,
was a super shy kid, like, my parents would take me
same.
places, I was, like, off in the corner with a book. Did
Yeah,
you have
same.
this
Yeah,
thing like I did where you would read a book that you would really get into? And not that I thought that the character in the book was a real person, like, I wasn't imagining them walking around
yeah.
the world, but I did feel like when I would get to the end of the book and it was over, like, I had made a friend and I had to say goodbye to them.
Oh, absolutely. Oh my God. Tomorrow, we are
Mhm.
soul brothers and sisters. Like, absolutely, I felt that way.
Was there a
Yeah.
particular series that you were into? I mean, I'm sure you were into many, but, like,
I read many, even Nancy Drew. And so, you know what? It's funny because when I met Einstein, I got really attached to Einstein, and he had a very similar phrase, a really nerdy phrase that was like, or maybe it was Newton, I forget. But one of them said in Latin. That's what makes me think it's not Einstein, 'cause it was in like Greek or
right.
Latin. But it was something like Aristotle is my friend, and they named three,
Uh-huh.
Plato is my friend, something is my friend,
Right.
right? And what happened is he had read them, and that's exactly how I felt.
Mhm.
And I felt that way about Einstein. I felt like, dude, we could be homies, man.
See, I felt that way about, like, I know they're somewhat problematic now, but I felt way about that with Little House on the Prairie. Like,
Oh
Laura
yeah,
Ingalls Wilder was my bestie. And that
oh yeah. We watched Little House on the Prairie. So in Mississippi, growing up, there were three shows that came on twice a
Uh-huh,
day: Little House on the
uh-huh.
Prairie, The Dukes of Hazzard, and The Beverly Hillbillies.
Okay, so 2 stories. 1, Dukes of Hazzard, my brother and I would, of course, like all siblings do, fight over who got to watch what on TV. That was his choice. I was not happy about that, so we would definitely fight over that. My second longer story is I was a pretty good kid. I didn't get in trouble a ton, but there was something I did, and I honestly don't remember what it was that I did, but my punishment was that there was like a two-parter on for Little House on the Prairie, and this was pre, like, TiVoing or pre-DVRing. So, like, you had to watch it live. And the punishment was that I was not allowed to watch the second half. And this was like, it was something with Almanzo, who she marries. And like, I was, of course, had a little crush on him. So my parents' bedroom was like my bedroom was here, and my parents' bedroom was like catty corner to it in the hallway. So I spent the night tiptoeing from my room into my parents' room, like pressing the little cable button with like the volume turned all the way down and like my ear up against it so that I could hear, but like also really paying attention to like, am I hearing my parents' footsteps on the stairs? And
Right.
and I would
Yeah.
turn it off and I'd run back into my room. And I still
Yeah.
remember just how awful a punishment that was.
Oh my God. I didn't think Red Dwarf was going to end up triggering you like this.
I know.
This is
I know. But then I moved on to like other book friends like King Arthur. So
childhood. So the other element of Red Dwarf is the one you posed initially, stasis.
Right.
Yeah. So I did some research on it, as you would imagine. And it turns out this is really interesting. So one of the things I often wondered is, why don't humans hibernate? And it turns out that we have the hibernation equipment. We have the hibernation gene.
What is hibernation equipment? I've never heard that phrase before. Like, what does one need to hibernate?
The precursor to all mammals, the ancestor of all mammals, according to the genetics biological studies.
I swear I thought you were going to say according to the Bible. And I was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay.
According to, yes. The Holy PB. It's a book. According to the genetic evolution studies, the ancestor of all mammals hibernated. And there is the hibernation gene in all mammals. And humans 400,000 years ago appear to have had the ability to hibernate. Now,
so why don't we hibernate
the other
anymore?
thing, exactly. Well, there are drawbacks, right? You can't reproduce while you're hibernating. You're vulnerable when you're hibernating. And there's this not ancient, but old claim from like 1900. There were some people in some very cold area of Siberia, I think, who would sleep for a week, wake up, eat a slice of bread, and then go back to sleep. And this is allegedly a real medical study. Turns out it was like the lemmings jumping off the cliff, right? Completely bogus. Yeah. I forget the name of them. Yeah. So in any case, there is actually a spectrum, a continuum of mammals shutting down their metabolism, right? Lowering their body temperature, shutting down their metabolism. So there's torpor, there's hibernation, and then there's full-on stasis, where all metabolic processes stop. In life forms, you have the single-cell type. Sure. You have the eukaryotic single-cell type, right? Versus the prokaryotic single-cell type. You have the simple multicellular animals. And then you have animals like us, all right? The simplest ones.
Yeah.
There's evidence of these suckers coming out of stasis after 800 million years.
What?
Right. Spores, all right? Look, there's 400 million year study. There's one for 200 million years. And so when it comes to this type of stuff, the question is, do we believe the result? So suppose I have a rock and I'm like, hey, this rock is, 7 billion years old, or older than the earth itself. And it's sitting in my lab and a fly lands on it. And my assistant swats the fly, cleans it off. And I go analyze the rock and I'm like, this rock is 8 billion years old. I'm going to investigate it. I see a piece of fly wing. That's evidence of 8 billion year old life.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Contamination, right? So some of these studies of these claims aren't accepted because of the possibility that all care wasn't taken. But there's one study from 2020 that goes in depth in the care they took, in the sterilization process, and they resuscitated life that was 101.5 million years old. Yeah, that's for a spore-like bacteria thing, right? So that is not. So the one that is not human-like, multicellular, are nematode worms, right? These tiny microscopic. I'm looking up on my computer right here because I want to get the exact number right. All right, recovered from permafrost. Believed to be, yeah, so they're like 30,000 to 40,000 years
So,
old,
all right. So
right? These
these okay,
nematodes.
so these nematodes, they have been in
Yeah.
stasis or some form of hibernation
Yes.
for
Tens of thousands of years old,
yeah.
less than 50,000 years old,
Okay.
right? So 30,000, 40,000, 20,000 years old. So now you're talking about something the size of us, okay? I don't know the details, but I would imagine just chemically that there are things, there's going to be a breakdown processes that have to be maintained if you stop all metabolic processes that may last for some time, but lasting for tens of thousands or even 1,000 years in an animal as complex as ourselves, just, you know, this is intuitively just doesn't sound right to me. Uh, so I'm ready to give my verdict. You got any questions?
Yeah,
Because
I do have a question. My question is, do you think that stasis and reanimation flies scientifically?
not as in presented as in Red Dwarf. It does not fly. It crashes and burns. None of it makes sense. The biology doesn't make sense. The physics doesn't make sense. But I can't wait till we get to section 3.
We'll hop over from science to story. First off, I just want to emphasize the fact that this show is a comedy. It ran for a whole bunch of years. It is what I would call a cult favorite, right? So,
Right.
often when you have a comedy, so much of what you're looking at is this this comedic premise that is set up. And so, looking at this idea of stasis, of how they sort of ended up trapped on this ship together, because we've talked about Lister, who's one of our main characters, but there are a couple of other folks that he's with. Folks, I use that word with quotes around it.
Right.
Characters that he is with on the Red Dwarf after he reemerges from the stasis chamber, right? So we have Rimmer, who is his counterpart. So we actually see them in the initial episode, and they're basically like the odd couple. You've got Rimmer, he's ambitious, he's anal retentive, he's neurotic, people don't love him. He's constantly there's a gimmick where he's constantly trying to take the test to, make it up into the officers' ranks. And then, of course, you've got Lister, who we've talked about, who is not ambitious, who is pretty much a total slob. But he's also super fun and friendly. And he talks about being on the ship so that his goal is to save up money so that eventually he can move to Fiji with the woman that he has a
No,
crush
right.
on, who doesn't really
Yeah.
have a crush
Yeah.
back, but that's another story.
Right.
So those are our two main characters. And then the other thing that happens when they come out of the stasis chamber, you mentioned that he's got a cat and there's a pregnant cat. Well, the cat during these 3 million years was in the hold. So there was a radiation incident, and that's why everybody else died. But the cat has been apparently in a safe area of the ship. And during those 3 million years, because the cat was pregnant, just kept procreating. So now there's been 3 million years of evolution with the cat, and the cat has evolved into a human form. Um, and so
As cats are known to
as
do.
cats are known to do. So Danny John Jules plays Cat, and as
Yeah.
one might imagine, in the human form of a cat, has some very cat-like personality traits.
Mhm.
And so these are your characters, and then the other character that we hear from a lot is actually the ship's AI, the ship's computer.
Yeah.
And these four are sort of trapped together. Now, eventually other people come in and out. There's various devices that they use for that. But coming back to the premise, right? Let's go back to this original piece where you've got Lister, who has smuggled this cat aboard, and he's given the choice, because he has broken the rules, of you can either the cat, or you can go into stasis for 18 months and lose all your wages, and that's that. So make your choice. I find it highly implausible that he would choose the chamber, because he has talked about, it's already been established that he has no ambition and he's on the ship to make money. So right there in the pilot, in this first episode, it already breaks the rule or the character trait that is set up. So that's a problem right from the
Yeah.
get-go.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so we've
Yeah.
got that, right?
Yeah.
Then we come out of stasis, and on one hand, you you find all of these piles of white powder that are the remains of the Hey, I don't know that are the remains of the people who ostensibly, were destroyed during this whole radiation incident. Okay, fine. I can
Right.
it's not real,
Yeah.
but I can
Yeah.
kinda go with that. It's a funny comedic device. But
Yeah.
also, like, my brain goes to, like, okay, fine, you survived in the stasis chamber, but what about all of the food? Like, what happens to food
Right.
over 3,000,000 years? I mean,
Yeah.
look, I've
Yeah.
eaten some MREs. I know you have because 'cause you've served. Like,
Yeah.
those things last a long time, but they do not last for
3
3,000,000
million.
years.
Yeah.
So, like, that
Mm.
bumped me. Then we get into
Right.
things like when he comes out of the stasis chamber,
Mhm,
he
mhm.
isn't really that surprised. Like, there's a moment of like, "Wait, where
Right.
am I? What's going on? What's happening?" But
And when he's being told everybody's dead,
mm,
They're all dead. Everybody's dead, Dave.
he sure takes that pretty well.
yeah, like, there's not a great amount of upset. The
Yeah.
irony is that, there is a point later on where there's what's called a stasis leak, which is you can
Right.
go backwards in time, and they essentially
Mhm,
go
mhm.
back in time to a place where the leak is, but the comedic device of the leak is that you have to go, like, to the physical area where the leak occurs, which, of course, in this place, because it's a comedy,
Mhm.
is the shower.
Right. If there's gonna be a leak of radiation anywhere,
Yeah,
it's
if
gonna be in
there's
the
gonna be a stasis leak, of course, it's gonna be in the shower, which,
Yeah.
but comedy ensues. Although it does kind of remind me of, like, you and I have talked about Star Trek transporters, like, it kind of reminds me
Yeah.
of some of the transporter rules and why initially there wasn't
Right.
point to point
Yeah.
transporting allowed
Yeah.
because, like, what if you reemerged and you were, like, stuck in a pipe on the ship or something like that?
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
kind of the comedic
That would be
version of that.
terrible.
But when he does go through this stasis leak, um, it's actually there that he seems to be much more affected by what's occurred. So, I did think that that
Mm.
was kind of interesting.
That's interesting, yeah.
Right. And then, like, again, like with good sci-fi, like you can if something's done well, they can give you almost any what if, right? And if it's good, you'll like leap off of it and just go with it if it doesn't contradict its rules. And when we first come out of this stasis chamber, Lister has not changed physically. And also, I need to mention too, sorry, in case people are not familiar, when we talked about Cat, who we know why Cat has evolved. Rimmer is a hologram. So because this ship, they do set up the idea that if you die on this ship, you can be brought back as a hologram. So Rimmer comes back as a hologram. So we're not so worried about him. But with Lister, he comes back and he looks exactly the same. He hasn't aged, all of that. Well, there's a later episode. I want to say it's in, I think it's season 4, maybe.
Season 4,
Yeah,
I know
yeah,
what you're
yeah.
getting
So
at,
right.
yeah,
So
yeah. Rip Van Winkle.
yeah, so they go they go back into stasis for a couple hundred years, and suddenly he comes out and he's got like a beard and long fingernails and everything
Mm.
else. And
Yeah.
well, they don't make a big deal of it. I mean, I'm sure it's there more for a visual joke. Again, it breaks
Right.
the rules.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know what is really interesting is technology doesn't do well in space. Electronics does not do well in space. There's such a thing as radiation damage. And 3 million years is a long time for that stasis chamber to work really,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, but I would have like look, you know me. I'm very much as a creator myself. I'm very much like
Yeah.
primed to give something the benefit of the doubt. But I gotta say, this
Right,
one
right.
on the story side, like from the get-go, it just breaks a lot of rules. So I hate to say it, but if you're asking me from the story perspective, does it fly? I gotta say no.
Red Dwarf. You don't
Mm.
fly scientifically. You don't fly story wise. But do you get a different set of rules because you're a comedy?
So that brings us to, does it fly for the feels? Does it give you the
Yes.
vibes?
Yes. Cause come on, that's a part of the silliness, right?
Mhm.
If you just switch things up
Yep.
and just throw a monkey wrench in everything,
Uh-huh.
you know, because a lot of comedy is based on
Yeah.
surprise, right? A lot of it is, I didn't expect that. So when things change, and if they especially change in a way that's like corny, like one of my favorite comedic
Mhm.
devices is to say something that I imagine couldn't possibly, it's just preposterous. Right. And that and that shocks
You
people. And they're
never
like,
do
ha, ha,
that,
ha.
Hakeem. I don't know what
Yeah.
you're talking about there.
But I hear a lot of words that are used, and I never looked up their definition. And I think that this series, there's a word that applies. I don't actually know the definition of it, but it's something like kitsch or kish or
Kitschy.
keech or
Kitschy.
kitschy. This is kitschy, isn't it?
Yes, this is kitschy. And, kitschy is kind of like it's a little bit like tongue-in-cheek. Kitschy is like it's a little like, I'm not gonna say it's like B-level, but, like, there's an awareness there of being, kind of
Yeah,
silly. And I think
exactly.
one of the things that it's very charming, and I think
Yeah.
that's because one of the things it does well, despite all the inconsistencies I mentioned before in the setup, is that it really pulls from some classic comedy setups, right? So I don't know if you know the quote from No Exit, "Hell is other people," but what this
No.
okay, so
Yeah.
there's a play called No Exit by I never know if it's Sartre or Sartre, French.
Yeah, I know that
Okay,
name.
so
Yes.
famous
Yeah.
play, No Exit. It's basically 3 people trapped in hell together, and that setup has
Ooh.
been used to great effect in comedy throughout the years, and that's essentially what you've got
Mm.
here. You've got these characters trapped in this ship together who are gonna try to travel back to Earth, whether it takes 3,000,000 years or however long it takes, and then you've got these classic character types, right? Starting with our odd couple of Lister and Rimmer, and that goes
Speaking of which, you mentioned Odd Couple. Did you watch Odd Couple? Felix Unger and Oscar
There's
Madison?
been
Did
a
you
couple
watch?
different iterations of Odd Couple, and yeah, I mean,
Oh,
that was on, like, in reruns in our house a lot, so
oh,
yeah,
nice.
my dad loved
Yeah,
it.
I used to love The Odd
Mhm.
Couple when I was a kid.
Right,
Yeah,
so
yeah, I thought it was hilarious.
think about this, it totally applies here, right? So you've automatically
Yeah,
got conflict set up. And then you add in and there are so many characters, like, throughout time who kind of fit those tropes. I mean, if you think about, like, Brooklyn
oh yeah.
Nine-Nine and the character of
Mm,
Boyle, who's sort of like your lovable guy who's just a little maybe a couple sandwiches short of a
right.
picnic. Think about,
Yeah.
like, Jason from The Good Place. Think about, I mean, honestly, even, like, the Ernie-Bert dynamic from Sesame Street, right? I'm not calling Ernie dumb. It's just, he's like you've got Ernie's, like, laid back, and Bert is a little more, and then you've got your characters like Bert, so
Florida and Walona.
mhm. Then you add into the mix, you add in Cat, who, like we said,
Yeah.
has all these cat-like qualities, like constantly grooming themselves, so they're a bit vain, they care
Yes.
about what they look like. They're incredibly self-centered, right? And so think about characters like Karen from Will and Grace, or think about, Jenna
Wait a
from
minute. Let's get
30 Rock, or Ava from Abbott Elementary. Like, these are all character types who over time have proven you put them all together
mm,
and you get great,
yeah.
delicious, funny, juicy conflict.
Yeah. And so here's the question then, because this is something that when it comes to judging things, whether it's food, whether it's
Yeah.
entertainment, if there is a nostalgia there,
Mhm.
which for this one there is for
Yeah.
me, am I really liking it, or is it the nostalgia is like a cheat that makes me
Wait,
like
hold on.
things more, and I
What do
think
you mean why
they're
do you say there's a nostalgia here for you for this?
oh, it is because just the style
Mhm.
of it, the type of humor, the plots that to set up, the settings that you set up.
Sure.
It feel the way that things are written today differ, and it reminds me of that era of my life. In earlier times, the 80s, the 90s, right? Even the look of it on my screen, right? Yeah, I could go from this to a Michael Jordan basketball game, right? And Magic Johnson, Larry
You're doing
Bird,
your
right?
own time travel through this.
Um, yeah, it does that for
Yeah.
you, right? Music
Mhm.
and TV shows, they can really take you back. And so when you go back, you're going back to a time because it's in the distant past, whatever hell you were going through then, even as a kid, right? Because, toddlers, they go through hell every day. They have high highs
Mhm.
and,
High and low lows. Oh,
ah!
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Time, your mind has a way of remembering the good times. It's one of these things where I see people always complain, back in the day, families were closer. No, back in the day, you were a kid, so you were always with your family. It's
Well, I mean,
the
I think that look, I think that nostalgia can prime you to give something the benefit of the doubt, but I also think that if something's good, it's good, and if it's bad, it's bad, and, like, I mean, we've been watching a lot of, way back TV with my daughter because, like, she's watching a bunch of stuff from the '90s right now, and there's
yeah,
stuff that
yeah.
totally holds up, and there's stuff that I'm like, and
Oh
with
yeah,
this show, like, despite all the inconsistencies, the writing is
yeah.
really fun, it's super
There
silly,
you
like,
go.
even the inconsistency that
Yep.
I mentioned about, Lister being given the choice to
Yeah,
go into the stasis chamber between,
right.
like, losing his pay and the cat and how it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So, flip that around, the fact that he chooses to save his cat makes him so lovable, so you're rooting for him, and the fact that you have that rooting interest in a character, so it's super fun to watch, and it's a credit to the writers, Rob Grant and Doug Naylor, for putting together this show that, like, capitalizes on all of this classic comedy setup and yet jettisons us 3,000,000 years in the future and invests us.
Allegedly, it's in the '80s. That 3 million years in the future is in the '80s. I can tell you that right now. Like, for example, how did he get busted with the cat? Because he took a picture with the cat and he sent it to the photo lab on the ship
Uh-huh.
to be
Right.
processed.
You take a photograph of yourself with the cat and send it to be processed in the ship's lab. Now I'm going to ask you again. Do you have a cat?
No.
Have you got a cat?
Yeah, right. That they did not foresee digital cameras.
No.
They got to print. They got to.
No, they didn't. They
Yeah,
didn't.
they didn't see smartphones and this sort of thing. So I feel it. I feel its vibe. I really feel its vibe. I don't know if I love it, but I laughed out loud
Mhm.
while watching
I
it.
did the
Right?
same thing. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
I was just sitting in the kitchen cackling as I was watching it. My husband was like, "What is going
yeah,
on here?" I was
yeah,
like, "This is a really funny
yeah.
show." So
It's really funny, and I feel like the acting sometimes it's in the later episodes especially I find it to be not as good, but in the early episodes I'm just like, whoa, how did I not know about this?
I don't know. I think this show is actually a really great example of a show where the science doesn't really add up. Honestly, the story setup kind of doesn't really add up, but you don't care because you're just having a great time watching it. And look, maybe we're inclined, you talked about nostalgia, maybe we're inclined to give comedy a little bit more of the benefit of the doubt because when it comes to like, well, these pieces don't quite add up, but you're making me laugh, so I don't care. I mean, I definitely give credence to that. Although again, like if it weren't funny, then if the comedy wasn't
Oh,
playing out, then
yeah,
all those other things would
yeah.
matter a lot more.
Exactly. You couldn't make this show without it being funny. I mean, it
Mhm.
has to be funny. It's like
Right.
Spaceballs, but not.
Yeah, that's and and there is sort of this history, like there's not like a ton of sci-fi comedies, but there are some, right? Like you've got,
That's right.
you've got Spaceballs, you've got Galaxy Quest, you've got now you've got Lower Decks, which is, from the Star Trek
Yeah.
universe. And the idea, like it also sort of this classic workplace comedy, with the
What is what is that one that I love that has the big giant bugs? Starship
sta
Troopers. I know it's not supposed to be a comedy,
well, I
but it is a
I put that
comedy.
into a separate category. That's actually satire.
It's really
Yeah,
satire?
it's
Oh,
really
I
satire.
thought they were trying to be serious and accidentally made a comedy.
We will save that conversation for another episode. If everyone who's
So
listening wants to hear about, Starship Troopers and is curious about us doing that as an episode, definitely let us know in the comments or on
absolutely.
social media.
But I think we are in agreement on the final third phase of our evaluation. Does it fly for the feels? Does it fly for the vibes? I'm loving it.
I'm so there with you. I am right next to you in the passenger seat, taking off to watch the rest of the show. Hakeem, it has been such a joy discovering Red Dwarf with you. I love the fact that we
Right?
got to
Yeah.
discover this new series together.
Yeah, same here, same here. Thanks for always teaching me something on these episodes. I hope that whenever I delve into a new area, it shouldn't surprise me, but it always surprises me how much I just don't know, right? You learn how much you don't know as you learn more.
Mhm.
And I'm learning so much from you about how these things are thought of. Like the thing you just told me about staging.
Mhm.
I had no idea how films were selected.
Oh, you mean about selecting stuff for film festivals? Yeah. I mean, every
Yeah,
festival does
with
it
that,
differently, but yeah.
yeah. Was that called staging? Was that right?
Screening.
Screening, yeah,
Screening.
screening, same thing. But you're doing the digital, I'm doing the analog. Shakespeare stage, today they screen. All right.
Exactly.
Everybody, please come back next Friday. Check it out. We're gonna have another banger for you.
That's right.
And it might fly.
It might fly or not, but give us a look on TikTok. We are at Does It Fly Pod. You can also follow Roddenberry on Instagram, Facebook, and on Twitter/X. So find us, tell us what you're thinking. I can see Hakeem thinking. You're always thinking.
I'm always thinking. I was gonna bust out in the theme song, but I thought it'd be better if you sang it. So it's a female lead.
I don't know if I'm quite ready for my close up yet, but maybe we'll attempt theme song karaoke next time.
I'll play the guitar and you belt out the.
All right, we're gonna say goodbye before this goes off the rails. Thanks everyone. We'll see you next time.
It's been off the rails. Take care.